it is that luxurious experiences is what's separating the rich from the poor. Now, many times as we look at the economy, we try to figure out what it is that we can do to position ourselves to take advantage of the situation so that we have the best, most appropriate position for our family, for our friends, for ourselves, for everything that we got going on in our world. And as we look through the news articles and we look through the situations that many people are now facing, hold on one second, let me make sure the Wi-Fi is turned off here. All right, yeah, it should be. All right. Oops. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. I want to make sure the Wi-Fi is turned off so we don't get any glitches. So as we try to understand what it is that's taking place within the economy and try to understand how it is that we can use our regular day jobs or our efforts to try and position ourselves for the best, most appropriate position to be in, we have to understand a lot of the underlying economic forces that are at play that create the environment that we are now working in. I really, really love this essay. Cantillon essay on economic theory. There's a link down in the description. You can get this essay off of Amazon. I get a little commission if you buy that essay off of Amazon, but you do not have to buy the essay. You can get it for free at the Mises Institute. I encourage everybody to go and get that PDF file from the Mises Institute and read through the essay, especially chapter 6, 7, and 8 of part 2 of that essay. 6, 7, and 8, the increase and decrease of money to the state and the further reflections upon that topic. Oh my gosh, what an eye-opener to the situation we now face. Now I'm going to break down some of this essay for you so we can get a better understanding of what it is that we are facing today. It says here, for the abstract, increases in the supply of money from a balance of trade eventually causes prices to rise. This in turn puts pressure on the domestic producers and increases imports. This results in that the balance of trade is reduced and eventually is negative. This is Cantillon's price specie flow mechanism, which demonstrates the reason for the tendency for equilibrium in international monetary flows. The balance of trade can result in economic power, but this also causes the economy to lapse into luxury and decline. So here it is. It's the move into the luxurious experience that eventually causes the decline. This is the major problem, and most people don't realize it, that they work hard, save that hard work, try to increase their standard of living so they have a better way of life, and it's that move exactly that creates the problem. And nobody really understands why it takes place. This increase in the standard of living that ends up causing the separation to take place. Now, Cantillon describes it, and so we're going to start breaking this down. All right, we have seen that the quantity of money circulating in a state may be increased by working its mines, by subsidies from foreign powers, by the immigration of foreign families, by the residence of ambassadors and travelers, but above all, by a regular and annual balance of trade, from supplying goods to foreigners. Now think about this. This is exactly the description of the United States. Cantillon wrote this essay hundreds of years ago, way before the United States and the government and all the things that we have going on before the Industrial Revolution. He was long gone by that time, but he knew the underlying economic forces that create the situation that most governments, most people, most states, and most entities out there will face. Understanding these underlying economic forces are by far the best way to make the decisions for yourself. Now again, by the regular and annual balance of trade from supplying goods to foreigners. Again, this is exactly the position the United States was in when we were a manufacturing powerhouse. And by receiving from at least part priced in gold and silver, right? We would export the stuff and then we would import gold and silver from these other nations out there. Excuse me. It is by this last means that a state grows most substantially, especially when its trade is accompanied and supported by ample shipping and by significant output of raw materials necessary for the production of exported manufactured goods. So if you are a manufacturing powerhouse and you are exporting all this stuff, you are importing money. That money then gives you a higher standard of living. So many people want to know, why is it that back in the day we had such a good, easy standard of living where one income was enough to produce for the entire household? Wife, kids, vacations, retirement, college tuitions, all the other stuff came from a single income. Well, we were a manufacturing powerhouse, producing the world's greatest stuff and sending that stuff out there to the world. When we did that, the world sent us the money and we increased our standard of living. Goes on to say this. However, the continuation of this commerce gradually introduces a great abundance of money, right? We get that money. We get the money from all the production. And little by little increases consumption. That's right, the higher standard of living. You're enjoying more ribeyes, you're enjoying more beer and wine, you're enjoying more of all the stuff, right? You're consuming more. Little by little increases consumption. Foreign products must be imported to meet this demand and must be paid for in the reduction of the annual balance of trade. So as you increase this standard of living, you start consuming more, supply-demand imbalances start to take place, foreign production starts to compete with the domestic manufacturers. When you start buying foreign production, you are now exporting money. This is exactly how the Cantillon effect takes place. When you're on a gold standard, you start pulling in all the gold from the other nations. But once you have flipped the script and now you are buying foreign production, you are exporting your gold. All right? With the, what did he call it? For foreign products must be imported to meet this demand and must be paid for by the reduction in the annual balance of trade, meaning you're no longer going to be exporting as much as you're importing. That's the reduction. Right? On the other hand, increased expenditures increases the cost of labor and the prices of manufactured goods. It often happens that some foreign countries try to set up the same kinds of factories for themselves, in which case they stop buying those of the state in question. So even though you were a manufacturing powerhouse producing all the world's greatest stuff, and you're selling that stuff out there to the world, there's going to be a foreign entity out there who says, hey, we're not going to buy your production anymore because we're now producing it for ourselves. So even though they may not be exporting it to you or to anybody else, they're just simply no longer buying it from you because they're producing it themselves. That's a problem. That becomes a problem for your exports, right? Although these newly established factories and manufacturers are not perfect at first, they reduce and even prevent the export of those goods from the neighboring states into their own country where they can be acquired at a better price. See? All of a sudden, you're cut off. You're no longer making money because you're not selling your stuff to that nation. They're making it for themselves now. Right? That doesn't have anything to do with your government or you or anything else. That has to do with all of them outside of your nation. In this manner, the state begins to lose some branches of its profitable trade, and many of its workmen and artisans will lose their jobs, will leave the state and find employment in new foreign factories. Wow, everybody talking about how it is that these domestic manufacturers got pushed over to foreign production. Well, yeah, Cantillon describes exactly how that's going to take place. You can blame the government for it, or you can just understand that it's an underlying economic force that was described hundreds of years ago. All right, which one are you going to go with? Well, yeah, it's easier just to blame politicians than to understand it from an underlying economic force that has taken place. I mean, even though Cantillon describes it hundreds of years ago, people will ignore it and say, oh, nah, I'm going to stick with it's a politician's fault. Well, go for it. I mean, see if that makes it better for you to understand. I don't know. All right. In spite of this diminution in the balance of trade, the custom of importing various products will continue. If the manufactured products of the state have a great reputation and can be shipped to distant countries at low cost, the state will maintain its advantage over the foreign manufacturers for many years and will maintain a small balance of trade, or at least keep it even. So now, to understand what's happening there, if you produce at a higher price than a foreign competitor can do it, but yet you can distribute cheaper than they can, you may be able to hold on to your manufacturing base because of your distribution technologies or capabilities. right? If you have the ability to get the product out there cheaper and more efficiently than somebody else, even though they produce it cheaper, you may still be able to hold on to your manufacturing state. If, however, some other maritime state tries to perfect the same articles in its navigation at the same time, it will, because of cheapness in manufacturers, take away several branches of trade from the state in question. Consequently, this state will begin to lose its balance of trade and will be forced to send part of its money abroad every year in order to pay for its imports. No matter, see, like once you get to the point that your competition, your competitiveness is no longer enough, right? You can't ship cheaper than they can ship it. You can't manufacture cheaper than they can manufacture it. You're out of the game. That's it. You're done. Why would they buy it from you? Moreover, even if the state in question could keep its balance of trade and its greater abundance of money, it is reasonable to suppose that this abundance will plunge many wealthy individuals into luxury. Bang! Right there, right? Let me read it again, because this is exactly what's happening right now. Cantillon's describing it. You want to understand the underlying economic forces so you can position yourself? Understand right now this is what he's talking about. Hundreds of years ago, experience that we get here in the United States described with this underlying economic force. Here we go. Moreover, if the state in question could keep a balance of trade and its greater abundance of money, it is reasonable to suppose that this abundance will plunge many wealthy individuals into luxury. Of course you're going to want a bigger house. Of course you're going to want a nicer car. Of course you're going to want to have nicer clothes and eat better food. There's no doubt about that. That is the plunge of wealthy individuals into luxury. They will buy paintings, precious stones from abroad. They will want silks and rare objects. And they set such an example of luxury in the state that in spite of the advantage of ordinary trade, its money will flow abroad annually to pay for this luxury. All these people buying these luxuries are literally sending the money out of the country. This will gradually impoverish the state and cause it to pass from great power to great weakness. You see what's happening? This is why people are so concerned. They want to blame politicians for this when really it was the luxurious experience that most people want. That's what's causing the problem. It's going to impoverish the state and cause it to pass from great power to great weakness. This is what Cantillon was describing hundreds of years ago that will happen to a powerful manufacturing state. They increase their capabilities of manufacturing, distributing that stuff out there to the world, bringing the money in, increase the standard of living, to dive into luxury, and eventually will impoverish the state and pass it from great power to great weakness. Let's continue on. The state has arrived at its highest point of wealth, and I always assume that the comparative wealth of a state consists mainly in their respective quantities of money. It will inevitably fall back into poverty by the ordinary course of things. It's not anybody's fault. It's the ordinary course of things that it falls back into poverty. It's the way it works. The United States is not immune to this. The too great abundance of money, which gives power to the states so long as it lasts, throws them back imperceptibly, geez, I am horrible at pronouncing words, imperceptibly, but naturally into poverty. This would seem that when a state expands by trade and the abundance of money raises the price of land and labor, the prince or the legislator ought to withdraw money from circulation, keep it for emergencies, and try to slow down its circulation by every means, except compulsion and bad faith, to prevent its goods from becoming too expensive and avoid the drawbacks of luxury. Because we know that the move into luxury is the problem. However, it is not easy to perceive the opportune time for this, or to know when money has become more abundant than it ought to be for the good of the preservation and the advantage of the state. Therefore, princes and heads of republics do not concern themselves with this sort of knowledge, and strive only to make use of the abundance of their state revenues to extend their power and to insult other countries on the most frivolous pretexts. Some things just never change, do they? Some things will just never change. These princes and heads of republics do not concern themselves with this sort of knowledge. They don't even know. And I think that's still consistent today. They don't know. They don't know. They don't know what's going on. Because they don't concern themselves with this sort of understanding. Okay, all things considered, working to perpetuate their glory of their reigns and administrations and leaving monuments of their power and wealth is perhaps the best they can do, because according to the natural course of humanity, the state must collapse on its own. They, the politicians, the powers that be, only accelerate its fall by a little. Nevertheless, it seems that they should try to make their power last during their times of their own administration. They don't know what the hell is going on. They don't understand what the problem is. They don't understand that move into luxury is what's separating the rich from the poor and causing the problems. Nobody concerns themselves with this sort of knowledge. Few years are needed to raise abundance to the highest point in the state. However, still fewer are needed to bring it to poverty for the lack of commerce and manufacturing. See, we're still pushing commerce. Consumer detonation. We use it with debt issuance. We would never be able to consume if we didn't have the debt issuance, because all the gold would have been redistributed back out there to the rest of the world had we not severed ourselves from the gold standard and went into 100% fiat debt-based currency. That's how the new money comes in, and that's how the separation continues to be driven here in the United States and many places around the world. Right? Few years are needed to raise the abundance to the highest point in a state. However, fewer are needed to bring it into poverty for the lack of commerce and manufacturing. Without speaking of the rise and the fall of the Venice Republic and Hanseatic cities, Flanders and Brabant, the Dutch Republic, who have succeeded each other in profitable branches of trade, one may say that France's power has only been on the rise from 1646, when factories were established to produce clothing which had previously been imported, to 1684, when the number of Protestants entrepreneurs and artisans were driven out of France. The kingdom has done nothing but recede since this last date. Yeah. Once you lose your manufacturing base, it's over. How is it that you're going to continue on bringing new money into the system? There isn't. There's no way. That manufacturing distributes out there to the rest of the world, and next thing you know, you lost your income. You fall into poverty and misery. However, the United States did something very unique during this time. We severed ourselves from the gold standard and said, no, we're going to go into this 100% fiat debt-based currency, world reserve currency on a fiat basis, where we are going to ever increasing the amount of money that comes into the system, which will drive the wedge between the rich and the poor. It wasn't done to the point that they were like, hey, let's drive a wedge between the rich and the poor. They were just, hey, let's continue this system on and see how far we can push it. Now we have this huge separation between the rich and the poor, and people are like, how do we deal with the problem? You can't. You can't deal with the problem. You can't fix it. It will be immediate drive into poverty if we try to fix it. Right? All right. Goes on to say, I know no better measure than leases and rents of property owners to judge the abundance and scarcity of money in the state, or money in circulation. Wow, that's like very telling today. I left 2 links down in the description for you, talking about the luxurious real estate market. There's a lack of mansions for the rich people, And the rich people are dumping their money into luxurious real estate. Okay? I know no better measure than the leases and rents of property owners to judge the abundance and scarcity of money in circulation. When land is leased at high rates, it's a sign that there is plenty of money in the state. But when land has been leased at a much lower rate, it shows, other things being equal, that money is scarce. I have read in the state of France that acres of vineyard near Mantes, not far from the French capital, which leased for 200 livres, Torunos, I'm sorry, I should look up how to say these things, of full weight in 1660, only leased for 100 of the lighter money in the 1700s. However, the silver brought from the West Indies in the interval should naturally have raised the price of land in Europe. The author of the State of France attributes this fall in rent to defective consumption. In fact, it seems that he observed the reduction in wine consumption. However, I think he has mistaken the effect for the cause. The cause was a great rarity of money in France, and the effect of this was naturally a decrease in consumption. Right? Increase the money, increase the consumption. When he saw that there was a lack of consumption, he was blaming, like they misunderstood that it was a lack of money, not a lack of the consumption of wine. People would still consume the wine if they had the money, but it had a lack of money. So therefore the consumption fell. In this essay, I have always suggested, on the contrary, that an abundance of money naturally increases consumption and contributes above everything else to a higher valuation of land. When abundant money raises products to honest prices, the inhabitants eagerly work to acquire them. Right? However, although they do not show the same eagerness to acquire food and merchandise beyond what is needed for their maintenance. Think about that today. How many people work a 9-to-5 job and say that's all they should have to work? And then they wonder why it is that they barely make the bills. It's because most people throughout history did the exact same thing. When the abundance of money raises products to honest prices, the inhabitants eagerly work to acquire them. You have to show up every day if you want to eat. If you want to make your rent, you got to show up every day. You eagerly work to acquire them, although they do not show the same eagerness to acquire food and merchandise beyond what is needed for their maintenance. They only do as much as they can, and that is it. And that has been the same for history. Or else Cantillon wouldn't have been able to describe it from hundreds of years ago, observing the situation from hundreds of years before that. Same thing, right? Same things take place. It is clear that a state with more money in circulation than its neighbors has advantage over them so long as it maintains this abundance of money. So long as you can maintain it. All right. In the first place, given that the price of land and labor are calculated in terms of money, the state where money is most abundant will give up less land and labor than it receives in all areas of trade. Thus, the state in question sometimes receives the product of 2 acres of land in exchange for that of 1, and the work of 2 men for only that of 1. It's because of this abundance of money in circulation in London that work of 1 English embroiderer costs more than that of 10 Chinese embroiderers. Though the Chinese embroiderer much better and churn out more work in a day. In Europe, people are amazed that these people can live by working so cheap and that their wonderful fabrics they send us cost so little. It's because of the abundance of money. If you have a bunch of money in a particular area and that guy is doing work, you have to pay him a lot of money. But if there's not a lot of money in a particular area and you got a bunch of people who are willing to work, you can pay all those people cheap. It's about the abundance of money in circulation at the time. If you have an abundance of money, you have high wages. If you have a lack of money, then you have low wages and a bunch of people who can work. Just like these 10 Chinese embroiderers costing as much as 1 English embroiderer. And the 10 Chinese guys will turn out far more work. So how do you compete with that? You can't. You're not going to be buying the production of the English embroiderer when you can buy the production of the Chinese embroiderer so much cheap and get so much more with the higher quality. It's like that. You can't compete with that. There's no competition. Your manufacturing is now moved over to a foreign competitor, right? That's the same thing that we will face here in the United States. Trying to bring manufacturing back to the United States means that you have to compete against somebody who's going to be sleeping on the ground. How does that work? You can't. It's going to be very difficult. Secondly, tax revenues are more easily raised in a state where money is plentiful and in relatively larger amounts. This gives the state, in a case of war or dispute, the means to gain all sorts of advantages over its adversaries with whom money is scarce. You got all this money, you can buy all the war effort. If there are two princes at war or sovereignty or conquest of a state, where one has much more money and the other has little money but many estates where twice the money of his enemy, worth twice the money of his enemy, the first will be better able to attract generals, officers, and give some money than the second will be by giving twice the value in lands and estate. What they're saying is if you have money to give, you can hire a bunch of people, right? But the problem is that if you're trying to exchange something of value, you're going to have a harder problem. He continues on. Grants of land are subject to challenge and revocation and cannot be relied upon like money. I was like, hey, I'll give you all this land. I was like, yeah, but you might just take that land from me. If you give me the money, I got it. That's my money. I get to do whatever I want with it. Huge difference. So if you got a bunch of land worth twice as much as one other guy who has money, the guy who has money can deploy that in faster, more efficiently, and get what he wants out of it, as many people may not want the land. They may not trust it, right? With money, munitions of war and food can be bought even from the enemies of the state. Money can be given for secret services without witness, but land, produce, and goods will not serve for these purpose, not even jewels or diamonds, because they are easily recognized. After all, it seems to me that the comparative power of wealth of a state consists, other things being equal, in the greater or less abundance of money circulating in them. All right. This is good stuff. Like once you understand and see these, once you recognize these underlying economic forces, it starts to make makes things make so much more sense. Like, I don't know how many people try to figure out what it is that they can do to fix the system, not realizing that they are literally pushing against an underlying economic force. If you don't recognize it, you will be constantly pushing against the tide. I still have to mention two other methods of increasing the amount of money circulating in a state. The first is when entrepreneurs and private individuals borrow money from foreign correspondents at an interest, or when foreigners send their money into the state to buy shares of government stock. Boom. This is what we are now facing right now here in the United States. This exact description of how the new money comes into the system. Let me read it again. I still have to mention two other methods of increasing the amount of money circulating in the state. The first is when the entrepreneurs and private individuals borrow money from the foreign correspondents at interest, or when foreigners send their money into the state to buy shares of government stock. That's the bond market. That is the U.S. government bond market that they are talking about right there. Sorry, I'm just going to put a sun shield up there. This often amounts to very considerable sums of which the state must annually pay interest to foreigners. This method for increasing money in the states do not make it more abundant and diminish the rate of interest. See, this is the thing. It doesn't make it more abundant. You think the top 20% are the ones who are abundant. Everybody else is sucking right now. It doesn't make the people more abundant. It makes a small section of the people more abundant. Right? It doesn't make the state more abundant. All right. Diminish the rate of it. Okay. With this money, the entrepreneurs in the state find it possible to borrow more cheaply, to provide work, and to establish factories and with the anticipation of a profit. The artisans and all those whose hands the money passes through consume more than they would have done if they had not been employed by the means of this money. So you all of a sudden get this new money in, and all that money starts to flow through the system. People are going out there spending it, increasing their consumption, and the things that they are increasing their consumption on, those people are starting to get the new money, and it moves on down the line. Right? This is Cantillon effect taking place. New money comes in, and where that money starts flowing to. Right? The people who have first access to it. This consequently increases prices just as if the money belonged to the state. That's very interesting. Increases the money as if the money belonged to the state. That means this money doesn't really belong to us. Think about that. This is written hundreds of years before their current system. To tell me that this isn't an underlying economic force that is playing out dramatically right now, you're not going to be able to do it. It's right here, written in black and white. This consequently increases prices just as if the money belonged to the state, and through the increased consumption or expenditures, this causes public revenues derived from taxes on consumption are increased. Money lent to the state in this manner brings many advantages with it, but in the end, it always burdensome and harmful. The state must pay interest to the foreigners every year, and aside from this loss, the state is at the mercy of foreigners who can always cause trouble if they decide to withdraw their capital. Always cause trouble if they decide that they're going to back out. Surely they will want to withdraw their capital when the state needs it the most, as when preparing for war and defeat is feared. The interest paid to the foreigners is always much more considerable than the increase in public revenue caused by this money. Right? The interest paid to the foreigner is always much more considerable than the increase in public revenue caused by this money. One can observe these loans passing from one country to another according to investors' confidence in the state to which they are sent. But in reality, states have paid heavy interest on these loans for many years, will often find themselves bankrupt and unable to repay the capital. Guaranteed. At some point it all comes to a failure. Even Cantillon recognizes at some point that will take place. When trust is shaken, shares of public stock fall, foreign shareholders do not like to sustain losses, preferring to content themselves with collecting interest while waiting for confidence to return. But sometimes it does not return. In declining states, the principal object of public administrators usually is to restore confidence in order to attract foreign loans. If the ministry does not act in bad faith and keeps its obligations, the money of the subjects will circulate without interruption. In this case, money from abroad has the power of increasing the quantity of money in the state. That's what we are experiencing right now. The selling of those treasuries from the United States, pushing that out there to the world, is increasing the money here in the United States. This abundance of money that separates the rich from the poor, this is caused from all the debt issuance. The equilibrium that should have taken place back in the 70s when Nixon severed us from the gold standard, we are now facing the consequences of not going through that equilibrium. By not doing that, we ever increase the amount of new money coming into the system, and that separation between the rich and the poor will continue. There's nothing they can do to stop that. The only way to stop it is to stop the issuance of new money, and everybody falls into poverty and misery. But the borrowing road, which holds an advantage in the present, leads to a dead end and is but a flash in the pan. To restore a poor state with a shortage of money, a constant and real balance of trade is needed on an annual basis. You need to produce more, export more than you import. That's the only way. As is the development through navigation or the articles in manufacturing produced cheaper and thereby suitable for exportation. Merchants are the first to make their fortunes, then lawyers, they may get a part of it. The prince and tax collectors get a share at the expense of all others and distribute their graces as they please. When money becomes too plentiful in the state, luxury will follow and the state will fall into poverty. No doubt about it. Right? If you turn off the new money, because of the luxurious experience of the new money, the state will fall into poverty. When people say the government needs to do something about all this debt issuance, if you do not issue out that debt, bringing in new money, will fall into poverty. If you continue to bring in the new money, you're going to have ever increasing amounts of separation between the rich and the poor. Which one do you want? I mean, which one do you want? This is roughly the cycle that may be experienced by a large state which has both capital and industrious inhabitants. A talented public administrator is always able to bring the cycle over again, or begin the cycle over again. Not many years are needed. Years are needed to see it tried and succeeded, at least in the beginning, which makes for the most interesting situation. The increased quantity of money in circulation will be brought about by several factors that my argument does not allow me to examine now. As for a state without much capital and where capital can only be increased by accident or by particular circumstances of the times, it is difficult to find the means that would allow them to flourish by trade. No administrator can restore the republics of Venice or Holland to the brilliant situation from which they have fallen. This is why politicians are not responsible. It is you as an industrious people. Again, right here, they say it. As for the state without much capital, if you are not industrious and they don't have the money, okay, and where capital can only be increased by accidents or by particular circumstances of the times, it is difficult to find the means that would allow them to flourish by trade. No administrator can restore the republics of Venice or Holland to the brilliant situations from which they have fallen. You can't expect a politician to fix this. They're not in charge of it. They can't do anything. It's you as the industrious people increasing your standard of living, moving into luxury, that is creating the problem. It's not the politicians. Let's see here. But Italy, Spain, France, and England, however poor they may be, are still capable of attaining high degree of power by trade alone if they led by a good administration and if they operate separately. If these states were equally well administered, they would be great only in proportion to their prospective capital and to the greatness or lesser industriousness of the people. That's the only way they get their power, is how industrious you are. How well you are at building your products and distributing your products. That's where they get their power from. It's from you doing hard work and them taking advantage of you and your hard work because you are an industrious person. That's what does it. Am I done here, guys? Am I late? Okay, I got a few more minutes to see if I can get through the rest of this. How much more do we have? All right. The last method I can think of to increase the quantity of money actually circulating in the state is by violence and arms. And this method is often blended with others, since in all peace treaties one will try to maintain trading rights and other privileges one could obtain. When a state mandates contributions or makes several other states tributary to it, this is a very sure method of obtaining their money. I will not examine the methods of putting this theory into practice, but I will say that all nations have flourished in this manner, that all nations who have flourished in this manner have not failed to decline, like states that have flourished through their commerce. The ancient Romans were powerful in this manner than all the other peoples we know of. Nevertheless, these same Romans, before losing an inch of their land of their vast states, fell into decadence through luxury and impoverished themselves by the reduction of money which circulated among them. It was this luxury that caused the empire to pass into the hands of the eastern nations of the Orient. They were buying luxurious items and sending that money over to the Orient. They were buying rarities and silks and all this awesomeness from these foreign producers. So long as Romans' luxury, which did not begin until after the defeat of Antiochus, king of Asia around the AUC 564, came for the let me read this over. So long as the Romans' luxury came from the product of the land and labor of the vast estates of their domain, the circulation of money would only increase instead of decrease, so long as it came from, right? So long as the Romans' luxury came from the production of the land and labor of the vast estates, so long as they bought their luxury from the production of within the state, the money circulated would only increase instead of decrease. The public was in possession of all the gold, silver, and copper mines in the empire. They had the gold mines of Asia, Macedonia, and the rich mines, both gold and silver, of Spain and other countries. They had several mints where gold, silver, and copper coins were struck. In Rome, the consumption of all these goods and merchandise drawn from their vast provinces did not diminish the circulation of money any more than the picture statues or jewels themselves. Although the wealthy landlords spent excessive amounts for their feast and paid 15,000 ounces of silver for a single fish, all that did not diminish the quantity of money circulating in Rome, given that the provinces made tributes regularly, not to mention the money brought by the lenders, by the governors with their extortations. The amounts annually extracted from the mines increased circulation in Rome during Augustus' whole reign. However, luxury was already on a very great scale, and there was much eagerness not only for the curiosities produced in the empire, but also for jewels from India, pepper and spices, and all the rarities of Arabia. Silks, which were not made in the empire, began to be demanded there. Nevertheless, this money drawn from these mines still exceeded the sums sent out to the empire to buy all these things, right? Their increase in luxury it was just vast. They were bringing in all kinds of money from all these other nations through their tributaries, and they were sending massive amounts out for the luxury, but it did not cause them to fall into decline. However, under Tribius, money became scarce when that emperor collected 2.7 billion sesterces in his treasury. To restore an abundance of circulation, he only needed to borrow 300 million on a mortgage of his estate. After his death, Caligula spent all of Tiberius' treasure in less than 1 year, and it was then that the abundance of money in circulation was at its highest in Rome, and the wind of luxury kept on blowing. See, the previous leader was trying to withdraw the money to keep the dive into luxury from happening. When the next guy came in, Caligula, he spent all of Tiberius' treasure in less than 1 year, and it was that abundance of money in circulation was at its highest, and Rome was in the wind of luxury that kept on blowing. They just kept right on spending that money, right? Increase the standard of living and live that luxurious experience. The historian Pliny estimated that in his time, the emperor exported at least 100 million sesterces annually. This was more than was drawn from the mines. Under Trajan, land prices fell by 1/3 or more. According to the younger Pliny, the money continued to decrease until the time of Emperor Septimus Severus. Sorry guys, I'm terrible at some of these names. Money was then so scarce in Rome that the emperor collected enormous quantities of wheat, being unable to collect enough tax money for his enterprises. Thus, Roman Empire declined through the loss of its money before losing any of its estates. That is what luxury brought about, and what it will always bring about in similar circumstances. I hope you enjoy that, understanding that the move into luxurious experiences is what causes the decline. Cantillon described it very well from hundreds of years ago, and to think that we can change or reverse course on this is going to be a very difficult road, considering that you have to turn off the new money. When the new money turns off, everybody falls into poverty and misery. The moment that people beg the government to do something about it, new money comes into the system and the separation between the rich and the poor continue. There's literally nothing you can do. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.